British English with American English and Canadian English. Let's get started with this first one.
This first one is definitely the letter Z, although as a child we watched the American version of Sesame Street and they tried to get me to learn it as the letter Z, but this in Canada is definitely the letter Z, X, Y, Z.
I would definitely call this letter Z.
Interesting. For me, in the UK, in British English, it is the letter Z as well. Okay, let's take a look at this next one. What would they call this?
So this is definitely a bill in Canadian English. When you're at a restaurant and when you're done eating, you ask your server if you can have the bill.
The check is the most common, but I would also call this the bill.
In the UK, this is always the bill. Can I have the bill? Okay, on to the third. What would you call this?
So we call these either running shoes or runners in Canadian English. If you're going to go out for a walk or a run, you put on your running shoes or you put on your runners.
There are lots of different terms I might use for this. Tennis shoes or running shoes, even though they might not specifically be for tennis or running. Also sneakers.
In general, we call these shoes trainers. Trainers. Okay, on to the next.
A long time ago in Canadian English, we called this a Chesterfield, but now we just call it a couch. Sometimes we might say sofa, but usually when we see something like this, we say, I'm going to go sit on the couch.
I would call this either a couch or a sofa.
We would almost always call this a sofa or sometimes a settee. Okay, on to the next one.
The $1 coin in Canada has a loonie on it. That's a bird that lives in northern Canada. So we decided we would just call this the loonie. Then when we decided to have a $2 coin, we thought we would call it a toonie because it's worth $2 and it rhymes with loony.
Slang for $1, a buck.
So we don't have dollars in the UK, we have pounds. And our slang term for £1 is a quid. And we haven't thought of a cool name for two. We call it 2 quid. 1 quid, 2 quid. Another thing to note is when we have £5 or 5 quid, we'll call it a fiver. And for 10, a tenner.
In Canada, we would call this pop. I think it's the second half of the word soda pop. I think my American cousins use the first part of the word. I think they call it soda, but we just call it pop.
Actually, in the US, we use either soda or pop, depending on the region. I personally use soda.
You will find some people, I think more up north, saying pop. But in general, we call it fizzy drinks, which doesn't sound as cool. Okay, on to the next. What do you call this?
So these are what we call freezies. You buy them in the store and they're not frozen. When you come home, you put them in the freezer, and in a couple days they're frozen, and then on a hot day, kids can take them out, snip the end off with a pair of scissors, and eat it to cool off.
I'd call this a popsicle.
Okay, so yeah, we'd definitely call in British English this a popsicle, but we would also call it a lolly. Any kind of frozen treat that isn't creamy, we'd call a lolly. If it's creamy, it's an ice cream. Okay, next one. What are they going to call this?
So we would call this either a parking garage or a parkade. When you go to see a show in a city like Toronto, you park your car in a parking garage or in a parkade.
I would call this a parking garage.
For me, this is a multi-story car park. We do have a habit of overcomplicating things. All right, on to the next one. What do you call this?
So we would call this a washroom in Canada.
I would call this a bathroom, or we would also say restroom.
But we tend to call it the loo or just simply the toilet.